All right. Thank you guys so much for joining another episode of Celeste Therapist Podcast. My name is Celeste. I'm a therapist from Boston, Mass. If you've never been in here before, thank you so much for giving me a try. I appreciate you. Today, I have a really special guest, and I'm going to have him introduce himself to you all. Can you introduce yourself to my audience?
Hey, how y'all doing? My name is Martin Henson, pronounced he, him. I'm the Executive Director of BMEN Foundation, and I'm happy to be on.
Good. Thank you for having me. And BMEN stands for?
Black Men's Engagement Network. Nice. I normally don't ever have to say it all the way out because it kind of works both ways. So or people can really assume Black men. And I wasn't the person that created that. So shout out to the group of men that came together to found BMEN with me. But yeah.
It's dope. It's dope. I like it. So everybody who's listened to me for a long time know what I do. I like to start off learning who people are because I think this BMEN that you created and everything that you're doing to really like spread the message of communities, to spread the message of equality. People don't know that you have a story. So tell people a little bit about how you was raised growing up.
Yeah, I'm from the South. If you can't already hear it, shout out to Little Rock, Arkansas. That's where I was
Little Rock?
born and raised. Yeah.
Wow.
You know where that is?
No, but I just know the Clintons. That's all.
Okay. You got to, because when people, it's not often that people actually know, for one, where Little Rock is or anything about it. So you know the Clintons, so you got 1 point for that. Yeah, Little Rock, Arkansas is it's the South. It's not really a big city, nothing like Boston, which is currently where I'm at. And I was kind of surrounded by community. My mom had me involved in community centers. We Care is one that's out a little bit away from Little Rock, Higgins, Arkansas. And I just was in that space. I was in church. I did everything in church that you can do. So I was kind of the community. The grounding for me was just kind of a normal understanding of my world and knowing different folks and your grandmother cooking food and all these people coming by that you don't know who they are, but they know who you are. You have all of that. And then when I had, tragedy hit, my dad passed, he was killed. I was a young kid and I was just surrounded by family. I was surrounded by Black men, and it just really planted a seed in me that if I could get an experience like this, I want to make sure everybody gets an experience like this. I didn't learn how to articulate that until probably the past couple of years. They're like, wow. Oh, this is what I'm doing. I'm working this out in this way.
Okay. I thank you for sharing that. And I grew up, I'm born and raised in Boston. But as a teenager, I moved down south to Georgia, a small town. My grandmother lived on a dirt road in a trailer. That's how small it was. Walmart was the biggest place. I do remember like everyone just, being around, right? I think community for the South is definitely like people were speaking to me and I thought something was wrong with them. And come to find out, like people just speak to people down south. It's just different than it is in Boston. Oh, yeah. So what was it like being a Black man in Little Rock? I know when you're with your people, it felt fine. Was you raised in a diverse space, or was it mostly just around your people?
Diversity means a very different thing in the South, Little Rock, Arkansas. So you get up here in Boston and you have Cape Verdean folks and you have Trinidadian folks and folks from Colombia, all places. And in Little Rock, it was more like he was Black, white, or Mexican. Like there wasn't really that's how people talked about it. You could have been from a lot of other places, but there wasn't enough diversity. Okay. So growing up in Little Rock, the South, the messaging that you get in the South is the ways that you learn to kind of guide yourself, because you still have sundown towns is still a thing, in the sense that there's places that you need to avoid, and because you don't know what's going to come with it. It's not like they're gonna do the same things that they did before, but that's kind of that awareness around how you talked about navigating. So you would get these messages. Since I'm talking to you, the black person, I can put it out here that black people say to other black people, hey, watch out for those white folks. You know how white folks do. And in the South, they're talking a whisper sometimes. Now you would have so many of those. And when I got up north, it was a little bit different because the threat of violence and harm by way of race just didn't exist in the same way. It still exists, but in a different way.
Different.
Yeah. So, but I remember those messages, and when I realized that I got to school, I want to say maybe middle school, high school, and due to all of my upbringing and being raised in a very pro-black, proud of your history way, and I knew all of these facts that nobody else knew, it makes it a little bit easier for me to string these messages that we use and we give to each other to preserve ourselves. Those little, hey, watch out, be careful, watch out. That's how we survive. So that's the specific things I can think about the black experience in Arkansas. But there's so many black people down there. You can be in all black spaces for the majority of your life, and that can be the norm. So it's coming up here, I had to think about it differently. I had to speak about it differently because it's not pockets, at least in Boston, that you can go to for the most part where it's only black folks. It just doesn't exist like that.
Right. And I know there's an organization, Boston While Black, that I'm a part of that's trying to start, that comfortability here in Boston. But it's powerful how you were raised in a community like where pro-black was a thing, because I feel like even though I wasn't told to like muzzle my voice, sometimes it felt that way. And so I guess the distinction between like where you are now and being like a super activist person, a person that's very an activist mindset, pro-black, that stemmed from your foundation at home.
Yeah, and I didn't really know
Nice.
that for the longest. I thought this is just me being me, and then you talk to people and they're like, "Oh, why are you doing that?" I'm like, why wouldn't I? Don't you want to do it?
You were confused, like, wait,
confused, still confused.
Okay, so now you decide, because I was raised in church too, and I'm a therapist, and being in mental health world was never really it just never was a part of the language. Did you know you were always like going to go down this path of becoming a counselor?
No, not at all. Like there was a point in time where I wanted to be an engineer.
Wow.
My math skills were not up to par. And I actually didn't understand well enough what an engineer did, because I thought more of the creative piece was happening. And
right.
It's not how that works. So then I had a period of time. I really liked philosophy. I said it often that I enjoyed it. I liked the challenge of thinking and pushing yourself and seeing, can you really defend your values? So I moved into psychology because I couldn't do philosophy, because I didn't want to be a teacher, because I knew that's really what you're going to be doing. And as I went over time and got my master's, even then I got my master's with the idea that I can't do any real work with just a bachelor's in psychology. That it didn't become more clear to me until the years that I had been practicing, that I was like, oh, this seems like this was kind of made for me to be able to engage in.
That's interesting. And when you went to school, was there a lot of Black people? Like, what school did you end up going to?
University of Central Arkansas. It is in Central Arkansas. It's about 30 minutes outside of Little Rock. And, it's one of, I want to say it's a big commuter school. A lot of people, it's the close to home option. If, you go to school in Little Rock, so people will go there. It's kind of big. It wasn't too small. There wasn't, we had a Black student union and there was Black folks there, and you generally kind of knew who people were, or at least what cliques that they operated in. But you felt, I remember when I got in my grad program, it was like me and one other Black guy, and it might have been two Black dudes. few black women, and everybody else was white women. And I felt it. Like I was like, oh, this is and you know, that was your educational space. I didn't really seek out spaces to process what that was like I would now. I just I was in school, my daughter was young, I was working a lot, so I was like, let me just get this out the way. But that was predominantly white institutions and being black is a whole thing.
But you weren't, it wasn't named then, because I know I can name it now when I look back, but then I wasn't naming it like this is why I felt uncomfortable, or when people would look at me when black issues came up for the like answer or see how I felt about it. Were you able to name it back then?
I knew the place that it felt the most clear to me was in my philosophy classes. I knew it was uncomfortable being around all white people and them not really accommodating you the way that you have to accommodate them. I was definitely aware of that. And I remember when I would be in class, in our philosophy class, we would have these discussions and debates about the topics. And I remember the disdain that white folks in class would feel if I said something that showed that I knew a little bit more than they did. Like you could feel it. Like I was like, oh, what's happening here? Like we was just talking in class, having a discussion. I see you in the hallway. You look the other way. What's going on? That was strange. I remember that vividly though.
One of the things, because one of the things I do when people come on, I listen to other platforms they were on or read up about you. And on Dr. Kerry's podcast, you talked about, thinking about how even young boys are targeted as far as the way they're perceived. It's not just like men. It's not just black men. It's even the little boys. And you talked about even remembering, like, if something was stolen in the class and people are looking at you, you're like checking your pockets. Because for people that are listening, because I think growing up in a system that wasn't designed for you can make you forget who you are. But I think your grounding work with your family being pro-Black, having that community really has helped you not assimilate with the way America has defined Black men. Tell me a little bit about that. Like, tell people about like what that felt like to feel like, damn, did I steal this thing they said us that people said us that like they're looking for it?
that shout out to Du Bois, that double consciousness that you have to, that he mentions in The Souls of Black Folks. W.B. Du Bois is a famous Black I want to say author, and he did a whole bunch of stuff. But one of the concepts they talked about was the double consciousness, where you have to be aware of not only yourself, but how you're seen. And being young and not having words for that, because I wasn't reading it then. I wasn't one of the, I wasn't there, quite that young. But, I remember what it was like to have to navigate people's perceptions. And I think we forget when we talk about young Black men, Black boys specifically. And I think this might speak to the nature of, we were talking about Black men and we're including Black boys when we're talking about men, because we treat them like men. I think that's scary to me. I remember when I worked in a mental health clinic and there was a young kid. He was a young, handsome little boy, and he had the troubles that he was dealing with. But I remember being afraid for him, because I was like, as soon as he gets a mustache, he's a man now. He's going to be seen as a man, not in the sense that he's actually developed to that point. Now he's going to be seen as threatening. And I'm like, no, in my mind, I was like, there's nobody that's going to be able to prepare him for that shift. It's going to be sudden. He hits that growth spurt. 3 months later, they're treating you completely different than they treated you before, even though you're the same age. I remember thinking about that. I remember being worried about that. And part of my advocacy around the way we think about and engage Black men means targeting some of these biases and these stereotypes and these tropes that not just affect Black men, but affect Black boys too.
Oh, wow. I really love that a lot. Thank you for sharing that. And I think that, listeners who are hearing this, because, I have different types of listeners. And I think just hearing it from your perspective can really help shift maybe people's mindset and eyes around the way that they're doing things. I think working in a hospital with my white counterparts, and listening to the way they framed the Black kids versus the white kids was extremely eye-opening for me. Me being a Black woman and was a Black girl, like I don't have the same kind of like feelings of threat because these are my people. So it's really disheartening to like be a part of that and know that that exists, and that's what pushes me harder with this podcast and have voices like yours on here, just so people can really hear from different perspectives around the way things are. Now, my like, I didn't understand white, what is it called? White guilt, or I didn't really understand a lot of these things, even in college until, because I grew up in Boston and you know how Boston is. But where like it's not really, racism is, you don't, unless you're like really educated about it, I don't think it's as clear if you grew up in Roxbury around your people and that's all you know. I wasn't well versed in it the way you were. But I think Trayvon Martin was my awakening, and just seeing how people responded to his murderer getting off, and the way it felt like it was a clear-cut case of murder, but it wasn't perceived that way by America. And that was like, and maybe social media and just the internet has opened a lot of people's eyes around what's taking place with Black men. What inspired you to create this like network for people? Because I'm sure like some of what was happening in America was like hard for you to watch as well.
Yeah, so BMEN Foundation. It's been a long, winding path around what BMEN Foundation kind of began as and how it grew. It was largely, even though it came about in the middle of the movement in response against police brutality, a lot of it was in response to Me Too, and thinking about how men can be better responsive to sexual harm that women experience. And then from investigating and having conversations with men to figure out, hey, what's your experience like? I realized that a lot of Black men had stories. And then I realized, Black men need spaces. And this is how we talk about Black men, because we're in the middle of a movement to respond to police violence. And the ways that we frame Black men is still kind of terrible. We can talk about them after they've died and give them flowery eulogies, but in real life, the more progressive leanings and framings of Black men still would talked about the masculinity being dangerous and them being harmful, inherently harmful and violent towards marginalized communities. And I was like, these are kind of the same ideas that are just coming through a different pathway. Not unlike the battle that was happening in the early 90s over who can be tougher on drugs and crime between the Democrats and Republicans. Like it's very similar. So it really pushed me to advance my way of thinking about it. Now, my backdrop of being an activist and thinking deeply about that is always kind of like the norm. Some people ask you, when did you begin to be an activist? I'm like, it's kind of, I don't know if there was ever a time where I wouldn't have done something. I think how I do things has changed based on the tools that I have. What you said actually reminded me of I'm reminded of all these stories, because in the middle of thinking about advocacy, you kind of have to deal with your own narratives and own traumas and stuff that you don't remember. But thinking about Tamir Rice, I remember when I was little, I wanted a cap gun, and my mom said I couldn't get one because it looked too much like a real gun. That's before they start painting all of them red. I believe they paint them some different color. Like that, she knew that the thing was there. Or that she was fearful when I was younger of me having braids because how I would be treated. Your parents kind of know, and they have a sense of that, and they're aware of that. So all of the ways that Black men have to navigate and move. A lot of times in the South, you see certain parts of the South that are more conservative. See a lot of Black men with short hair because they don't have dreads, they don't have braids. They kind of have this. You kind of have to assimilate in a certain way, and we don't always give name to that. I know I said a lot, but these are the things that that kind of came up for me when I was building it.
Wow, that's powerful. And community's powerful for people. Like there's this unspoken bond when you know you're not alone. And then
Mhm.
to be around other Black men experiencing a lot of these things. I had someone on the podcast that just was released last week where we talked about emotions and just men in general having a hard time of expressing it. And I think that a lot of times people don't, it's not that men don't have emotions, it's just that they've learned to not allow their emotions to be heard because nobody's listening. And something you
Mhm.
said about the performance aspect of the way Black men are seen, I feel like, thinking about sports or entertainment
Mhm.
or what they can do, not who they are. Does that feel
Mhm.
accurate to you when you hear people talk about Black men?
Yeah, yeah. You and then within that, you're measured by the degree in which people feel comfortable with you, so they can have a favorite Black athlete until they start speaking out
Mm,
against issues, and then it's like you're doing too much. You need to just shut up and play ball, like they said to
mhm,
I want to say LeBron,
mhm,
or you see a lot of these racialized narratives as it relates to athletes in boxing, like really intensely, because one thing that white culture doesn't like is a prideful Black person in any competitive situation.
mhm.
They just don't like that at all. And you see it in the way that Black men are framed, and the sort of vitriol, the flavor of the vitriol that happens. So yeah, yeah.
And one of the I want to talk about how people can like be a part of this of Black men and like who how inclusive it is, which is great. But I want
Mhm.
to talk to like Black parents of especially young Black boys. I remember when the George Floyd thing happened. My son's 10, and you couldn't get around them like finding the video. And I remember he was confused. Why would they do that? He wasn't doing anything. It's interesting how we see things different than the people that want to paint us out to be aggressors will see things, but he didn't
Mhm.
understand. And then we talked to him about like racism and like how like things are like the way things have happened and how they've always happened. And he said like, are we ever going to be, will they make us slaves again, and I think having that conversation with him really helped me, or taught me I need to be more proactive and more engaging around just talking to him around Black issues and just being okay with being who he is, even if society doesn't say so. What would you say to like Black parents of young Black boys? Because you clearly never assimilated, but that was because you were raised not to. What would you say to that population?
I think it's just processing it all is just really difficult, and just acknowledging the weight that comes with it. I tend to suggest people seeking out community when they're
Hmm.
kind of in the middle of something, because one thing about white supremacy in these systems is that they're isolating, they're incredibly
Hmm.
isolating, and they function in a way to make you feel like there's not any other outlets, or that you can be of
Yeah.
no resource to each other. So that's one thing. I think the conversation is hard, and and
Yeah.
processing for yourself what's coming up for you before you don't have that with
Hmm.
your children,
Hmm.
um, is big. I have a daughter, and I don't know. I'm fearful of having a son. Um, uh, I'm fearful for my daughter for some of the same thing. What if she tries to do what I did? What if the
Hmm.
world is as unkind to her as it was to me?
Hmm.
That's all of these things come with parenting, and I think that we need to build communities with each other around how to process that and how to talk to each other about it.
Nice. You're such a therapist. That was a great response. I really love that.
Mhm.
Like processing it for yourself, because it definitely caught me off guard. Like my eyes watered up a little bit, like that he would even think that way. And I
Mhm.
think like I had to sit with it and just like, because it was hard. It was a very hard conversation to have, knowing like innocent boys are not looked at as boys, and he has to face that, and I have to help him give himself the tools to deal with it. So Thank you for sharing that. Now you talk a lot about community. BMEN is very much community driven and very
Right.
inclusive. What made you decide to make it that way?
I think I just realized that when people talk about things that are happening with black men, they I tend to assume that there's a kind of a generic sort of black guy, and most of the time he's um straight, hasn't been incarcerated. He's like kind of fits these narratives of what a good guy looks like. So I'm like, man, we're not really talking about all of the people that live in our community, whether they're formerly incarcerated, or they're undocumented, whether they're queer or gay or bi or trans, and just kind of opening that up, because even outside of the specific things or the marginalized communities within black men, I think there's our relationship to masculinity that we had to develop as a buffer to white supremacy kind of makes us fearful of talking about these different things. So giving brothers a space where they can feel safe amongst each other, uh, we can actually like learn ways to support each other and ways to think differently, and um, so nobody has to be alone, because I know the isolation, this as a therapist, isolation is a killer. And if we let people sit into that, and there's also all these other correlations with just kind of being isolated. It relates to violence, that relates to mental health, it relates to just community. Even when you have adverse or when you have mental health symptomology, you're more likely to have your community kind of give you space. And I'm just like, rather than leaning away from people, just lean into it. If there's more that we have to know, then let's have conversations about it. So that's kind of drove the me want to be inclusive.
I love that. I wanted you to expand on the masculinity, because I never heard that said that way, but when you said it, I'm like, damn, that's true. The masculinity that like men portray, or I
Mhm.
think was a buffer to white supremacy. And so like it seems like there's this mask or facade that black men have had to put on in order to like
Mhm.
survive. Does that
Mhm.
sound pretty accurate to what you're stating when you say that?
Yeah, yeah, and I felt like I had to really to take you said you've never heard anybody talk like that. And I don't hear people talk like that. So I'm like, oh, okay, I need to actually bring this narrative in a very public way toward the conversations around masculinity, because if we don't, they become very racialized. There's something wrong with the masculinity of black men. It becomes something dangerous. It becomes the same ideas around black men that have always existed, which is kind of my fear and things I've seen coming out of progressive lanes now. So I'm saying like, hey, this masculinity that black men have it doesn't have it's not in, it doesn't have this hegemonic mode or model. Hegemonic meaning seeking to be dominant over other groups as a
Right.
primary way of orienting it. It comes from a place of having to defend yourself against
Yeah.
vulnerability and systemic oppression, and you learn the idea of black cool was because being hot-headed could get you killed, for the
Yeah.
hundreds of years that we were enslaved, and we only been free for so long. So we've learned these legacies of like suppressing and holding it in. Are you ask, bro, what's going on with you? You all right? I'm good. I'm straight. I'm cool. I call it the rule of three. I gotta ask to do about 3 times. Like before I actually get a real idea
Yeah.
of kind of what's happening. And most of the time
Yeah.
too, I have to give some level of vulnerability to
Yes.
receive some back. You know.
Yeah. I think that that helps men when they hear like when they hear it from another man, it allows them to be okay with, or maybe they don't even have the language to say it, right? And they hear it and it's like, you know what, that's actually how I've been feeling. That makes a lot of sense, right? Not really learning the language to express emotions or to express what's been happening. Which is why places like Be Men is allows men to be able to, especially black men, to be able to just kind of say what's happening inside, so that I feel like it eats them away. It's like a toxin. Um, s- um, that was Jermaine. He came on last week. Described what happens when men don't aren't able to express their emotions. They can have a shorter temper. right? Which then leads into their relationship problems, but then they're categorized as one way when it's really like a lot going on inside. And having a safe space to say that is like so powerful.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
What if somebody's listening to this and they want to be a part of BMEN? Like, how does it work for people to be a part, for Black men to be a part of this community?
Yeah, we have monthly meeting spaces every second Sunday. We have the next one coming up day before Valentine's Day, February the 13th. So, which is coinciding with the Super Bowl. So we'll see who comes through. But yeah, we come there we have those spaces once a month. So we always are welcoming to men. We promote it as much as we can. You check it out on bmenfoundation.org or on our socials at BMEN and Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. And that's one of the ways that we get involved. We also do the Bridging the Gap program, which is Black straight men, trans women of color. We come together, talk about our experiences, what makes us different, what makes us similar, how can we end stigma for each other, and just kind of just welcome people into community in ways that I haven't seen happen. So, that we've done that a few times. People can always reach out at info@bmenfoundation.org to get more involved with that. So, we're doing what we can.
This is dope. With you doing all of the things you're doing, how does Martin take care of himself? How do you provide yourself?
I mean, when you take on more, you have to be more aggressive with your self-care.
Absolutely. Say that again for the people in the back.
You really do. Because like it's almost like if you driving farther and using more horsepower, you need more gas. So that's how I look at it. Actually, I got a piano behind me that I'll play. I ran before I got here. I write. I've been getting into kind of writing articles in publications. I'll journal. I'll be a therapist whenever I need one. I'll sing. I'll dance. I'll go out of town. I talk to my family. I talk to my daughter. It's just what maybe 7 or 8. You should be able to list all the things that you do off the top of your head. If you can't, then you're working too hard.
Yes. Oh, good. Like they say that again. And I think it's important for people to see as clinicians that we are also human, and we also have to do the work. It's not just like built within us. It's not like, just because we're advocating and I think talking about this stuff, we also have to do the work. And correct me if I'm wrong, but that's kind of like your medicine for living, meaning like you take it on a regular basis. It's not like you do it one time and you're good, right?
Yeah, correct. I do it all the time because I feel like if I'm not physically active, I feel like I'm more irritable. Yeah. Like I just can't. That's my offloading things. But you get to some points where there's more stress that happens, and you have to actually add a few more things. And sometimes you got to take things off of your plate. Like, I wanted to get all this stuff done. Actually, I'm gonna just sit here and kind of chill for a little bit. Yeah. Maybe I can get back to it.
Yeah. So, yeah. All right. That's good. I love that. So for my Black men listening, I really hope this was helpful. For people that have Black men in your life, like send this podcast to them because I think that I love having people like you on who have created this community. I'm sure building this platform out was not easy for people that are any entrepreneurs out there. What would you say to them about like the process? I'm so glad it's available, but I know it didn't just come to you in a package. What would you say to them about like the fears that may have come up around building this out?
You have to really, you have to acknowledge your ego and put that to the side when you're wanting to grow. And that's something I've always leaned into, is that I felt like I knew nothing when I started. So in 2018, knew nothing. Now there's so many levels of running an organization, so much information that I've been able to get. There's so many people that I've learned from, both good and bad. But you have to give yourself that growth, because if you never push past your comfort zone, you're not going to get there. You just
Yeah.
that was a big lesson.
Wow. So it's going on 4 years.
Yeah.
Nice. Congratulations. That's awesome. It
Thank
started with an idea and now it's here. 2018. I think sometimes people they'll see things like BMEN established and be like, oh, I can't do it like that. And it's like not realizing like you have a story behind it. There's emotions that come with building out things. So that I think that's really helpful for people to hear. So I really go ahead.
I was going to say, and it only works if I work.
Yes.
If I don't work, it don't work. So you got to figure out your relationship to that.
You can't just pray and have faith.
Oh, not at all. Not at all. You can pray and have faith with it, but you need to be putting the meat on the grill. Like it's not gonna happen if you don't do it.
No, this is good. I agree. I really appreciate your transparency. And I think that for people listening, definitely check out BMEN, share it with somebody that you love. Is there any last thing you want to say that you think I left out or maybe helpful for my audience?
Building community is really the intervention that I'm pushing forward. And whether it's I do it through BMEN for Black men, but we have to be connected with each other. And that staves off so many negative things in life. So when you're having a hard time, find people who are having similar experiences. I was on Reddit for a period of time, because I was reading about stories like, how did people get through this? But we can all do better jobs at creating communities so we can support each other.
Yeah, that's dope. That's a great message to leave off on. It's the reason why I started this podcast in 2018. It's because I wanted people to know they weren't alone. And like Martin said earlier in the podcast, isolation is a killer because those negative thoughts want you to stay isolated so they can have dominion in your life, and it can't have dominion and community at the same time. So the more like you are feeling a fight against getting up and being a part of community, know that's part of the process. But if you push past it, you don't regret, doing the work. So I
heard that dominion, that church in you coming out. People don't say dominion. You know where they hear it from.
You already know. I got a little church in me. I had to go Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday, Sunday. So, some of these words coming out. But I hate you. You do not want them thoughts to take over, because they will. And I tell people, imagine if somebody was living rent free and you're like, now you got to go. They're going to try to fight and stay. And you got to think about those negative thoughts and that mindset the same way. Is that it's a system that is unfortunately too familiar for your body. So in order for it to change, it's going to feel hard. It's going to feel like, what's the point? But, especially, we're survivors, and we've worked when we didn't feel like it and done a lot of things that we didn't feel like. So I say that to show you that you have the capability of doing it. But it does require your mindset to be shifted and remembering why you're doing it. What's your goal? And I know even as Martin was building out BMEN, it's the frustrations and the people that you learned from that didn't help. The only reason why you was able to keep going because you had that goal in mind. And so that's important. Thank you, Martin. I appreciate you so much. Make sure you guys share this episode, and we will talk to you later.